Linear combinations. How, exactly, does light, mind, turn into matter? It's via the wave property of phase. We shall provide the simplest possible demonstration of the process using the most elementary wave mathematics. The first thing to note is that a linear combination of a cosine wave and a sine wave of equal periods can be expressed as a single trigonometric function with the same period, but with a different amplitude and phase shift. In general, linear combinations of sines and cosines can be expressed in the forms a sin, x plus or minus ae, or a cos, x plus or minus ae, e.g. 1. C1 cos x plus C2 sin x equals a cos x ae, where C1 and C2 are linear coefficients, a equals amplitude, and ae equals phase shift. Or 2. C1 cos x plus C2 sin x equals a sin x plus ae, where C1 and C2 are linear coefficients, a equals amplitude, and ae equals phase shift. Bearing in mind that sin 90 degrees x equals cos x and cos 90 degrees x equals sin x, we can use equation 2 in conjunction with the trigonometric identity sin plus or minus plus superscript 2 equals sin plus or minus cos superscript 2 plus or minus sin superscript 2. The sin x plus ae can therefore be equivalently written as a sin x cos ae plus a cos x sin ae. Thus C1 cos x plus C2 sin x equals a sin x cos ae plus a cos x sin ae. Hence, by inspection, we see that C1 equals a sin ae, while C2 equals a cos ae. If C2 equals 0, then a equals C1 and ae equals a graph slash 2, since cos a graph slash 2 equals 0 and sin a graph slash 2 equals 1. If C1 equals 0, then a equals C2 and ae equals 0, since sin 0 equals 0 and cos 0 equals 1. If C1 0 and C2 0, then a equals C12 plus C22, and tan ae equals C1 slash C2. This mathematically demonstrates that when we combine matching sines and cosines, we produce a resultant that, in this case, is a phase-shifted sine. Using a different but comparable trigonometric identity, we can alternatively produce a phase-shifted cosine. In fact, there are 4 relevant trigonometric addition formulas. Sin plus or minus plus superscript 2 equals sin plus or minus cos superscript 2 plus sin superscript 2 cos plus or minus sin plus or minus superscript 2 equals sin plus or minus cos superscript 2, sin superscript 2 cos plus or minus cos plus or minus plus superscript 2 equals cos plus or minus cos superscript 2 sin plus or minus sin superscript 2 cos plus or minus superscript 2 equals cos plus or minus cos superscript 2 plus sin plus or minus sin superscript 2. What are phase-shifted sines and cosines? The trick to understanding them is to realize that they are impure. A phase-shifted sine is contaminated with a cosine contribution. A phase-shifted cosine is contaminated with a sine contribution. A pure sine runs along the real axis, extends into the imaginary domain, both positive and negative regions, and has zero cosine component. A pure cosine runs along the imaginary axis, extends into the real domain, both positive and negative regions, and has zero sine component. Waves that are orthogonal to each other are fully decoupled, fully independent. Pure sines and cosines do not contaminate each other. Waves that are non-orthogonal are coupled. They are dependent on both sines and cosines. What happens when you rotate a sine wave running along the horizontal axis through 90 degrees? It doesn't end up as a sine wave running along the perpendicular axis. Instead, it is mathematically converted into a cosine wave, its opposite. At 0 degrees, we have a pure sine wave. At 90 degrees, we have a pure cosine wave. As we rotate from 0 to 90 degrees, the sine wave loses more and more of its sine nature, until at 90 degrees, it has lost all of its sine properties, and turned into a cosine wave. The axes are where we have pure, decoupled sines and cosines. In the interaxial regions, we have coupled sines and cosines. The decoupled waves are mental waves. The coupled waves are spacetime waves. Orthogonal phase creates mind. Non-orthogonal phase creates spacetime. It's all in the math. There is no rational explanation for space and time other than math. Space and time have no physical origin. There is no physical origin for anything at all. The physical doesn't exist. It is always a misinterpretation of the mathematical, which defines the eternal mental. Science is nothing but a systematic distortion, corruption and misinterpretation of mathematics, stemming from the unreliable human senses, which scientists worship, and the bogus philosophy of materialism and empiricism, which scientists also worship. Consider every radius of the above circle, the Euler unit circle, as a unique spacetime frame of reference. Each radius serves as a hypotenuse, except the four orthogonal axial radii. These therefore have a different status from all of the others. This, bizarre though it may seem, is the difference between mind and matter. Mind concerns the axial radii, while matter concerns all of the other radii, non-axial radii. The spacetime universe of matter is bounded on all sides by the frequency world of mind, for the simple reason that all non-axial radii are bounded by the four axial radii. When everything in the universe is confined within the axial radii, we have an immaterial universe of perfect mind, a singularity, with no physical extension, no physical dimensions, and without space and time. The Big Bang occurs when decoupled sines and cosines enter into combinations, they become coupled, and non-orthogonal phase is thereby added to them. This is the mathematical condition necessary for the creation of space, time and matter. It really is as straightforward as that. The Big Crunch, which reverses the Big Bang, occurs when non-orthogonal phase is removed, and all sines and cosines again become completely decoupled, orthogonal, once again. The mental universe is a universe of perfect symmetry. The material universe is asymmetric. The coupling of sines and cosines creates the asymmetry that drives the Big Bang. The decoupling of these coupled sines and cosines at the Big Crunch then restores the symmetry that was originally lost. It should always be understood that the phase universe is never anything other than a mental construct and owes its entire existence to the mind. It is a hologram contained within the cosmic mind and will return to the mind over the course of a cosmic cycle. There is emphatically no such thing as a standalone independent physical reality, as scientists claim. There is only the interpretation of physical reality via our senses. Consider the following diagram showing a graphical plot of the trigonometric tangent function. The tangent function is nothing like the sine and cosine functions. It has a completely different shape. As we can see, it goes between negative and positive infinity. At 0 a grav radians 180 degrees, 2 a grav radians, and so on, it crosses through 0. The same is true for dash a grav radians and minus 2 a grav radians, and so on. At a grav slash 2 radians, 90 degrees, and also dash a grav slash 2, 3 a grav slash 2, and so on, the function is undefined. Because it could be positive infinity or negative infinity. This, once again, highlights the different status of the orthogonal axes. We see an ontological boundary between matter and mind. Matter can never reach mind through any material process. It must undergo a phase transition to become mind. Such a transition occurs exactly when black hole singularities are formed. A singularity is formed via the stripping out of all non-orthogonal phase information. It truly is that simple. All of the mysteries of existence are staring out at us from plots of trigonometric functions. We just need the eyes to see, the knowledge to utilize, and the wisdom to understand. We humans are so brainwashed by empiricism, materialism, emotionalism, mystical intuitions and religious faith, and so dismissive of reason and logic that we cannot see what is staring us right in the face. This is a strictly mathematical universe. All else is delusion. Only mathematics can rationally, analytically explain reality. Science certainly cannot, and nor can religion. Science absurdly believes that mind comes from matter. The exact opposite is the case, as we have mathematically demonstrated. Science cannot explain where space and time come from. Mathematics achieves this easily. Humanity has been relentlessly told that mathematics is unreal and abstract, that nothing in the world is perfectly mathematical. In fact, perfect mathematics exists in the mental singularity, the cosmic mind, that controls the universe, while the mathematics of the space-time universe seems complicated and imperfect, only because of the addition of complicated phase information. Humanity has to get over its hatred of mathematics, and its inability to see it as real, concrete and ontological. The only real, concrete things in the universe are waves and the monads that contain them. They are eternal and necessary. All other things are temporal and contingent, owing their existence entirely to this deeper permanent level of eternal mathematical waves. Imagine a pure sine wave running along the real axis of a Euler unit circle. All values of this wave are imaginary numbers, since we are dealing with I sin x, and imagine a pure cosine wave running along the imaginary axis of the Euler unit circle. All values of this wave are real numbers, since we are dealing with cos x. Now imagine a sinusoidal wave running along each of the radii that stands between 0 and 90 degrees. Each such wave reflects phase, hence none is fully a sine wave or fully a cosine wave. The waves between 0 and 45 degrees of phase are more like sine waves, and those between 45 and 90 degrees are more like cosine waves. At exactly 45 degrees, we have a sinusoid that is half sine and half cosine. It can easily be imagined that special things happen at exactly this angle of phase. It must have extraordinary mathematical properties, and may be the gateway from mind to matter. This ought to be a major area of mathematical and scientific research. Let's imagine a sinusoid running along the particular radius that stands at 30 degrees to the real axis. Like all such radial sinusoids, this sinusoid travels at light speed, hence belongs to the mental domain, in common with everything else that travels at light speed. Although this is a phase wave, it is not itself inside space and time. What phase waves permit is the creation of waves that are in space and time. The radius forms a hypotenuse of a Pythagorean right-angled triangle. So, what about the adjacent and opposite sides of the right-angled triangle? The opposite side, associated with the sine function, is none other than time. The adjacent side, associated with the cosine function, is none other than space. Remember that the law of right-angled triangles is that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. When you square space and square time and add them together, you get non-space and non-time, light equals mind. To put it another way, the mind square equals the sum of the time square and the space square. Space and time are just Pythagorean mind, fragmented mind, mind split into two components. Our minds are not designed to tune into the mental hypotenuse, but, rather, the component opposite and adjacent sides, time and space. We would have an entirely different understanding of reality if we had minds that focused on the Pythagorean hypotenuse, rather than the other two sides of the triangle. That's evolution for you. Evolution decided that space and time were more useful ways for animals to conceive reality. When our minds become sufficiently evolved, however, we will turn away from space and time to the frequency domain of mind, away from the dimensional to the dimensionless. Any sinusoid running along any radius travels at the speed of light. However, all waves running along the opposite or adjacent side of a Pythagorean triangle most certainly do not run at this speed. Since the sine wave runs along the horizontal axis and has all of its values in imaginary space, all waves that run along the horizontal side of the Pythagorean triangle are sine waves too, except they are curtailed sine waves, meaning that they are forced to fit into a length less than 1, which automatically prevents them from moving at light speed and turns them into temporal waves. They are now constrained distorted sine waves. They are, in other words, temporal sine waves, rather than sine waves outside time. They do not travel at the speed of light. Instead, they travel at a specific speed through time, the specific speed being set by the relevant phase angle. Every phase angle constitutes a different frame of reference and has a different unique speed associated with it. Exactly the same arguments apply to cosine waves. In Pythagorean triangles with the radius as hypotenuse, these become spatial cosine waves, rather than cosine waves outside space. As before, they travel at a specific speed through space, the specific speed being set by the relevant phase angle. So, by the Pythagorean law, the square of the speed of light equals the square of the speed through space plus the square of the speed through time. Equation 1. c2 equals versus 2 plus vt2, where c equals light speed versus equals speed through space, and vt equals speed through time. Solving for vt, we can write equation 2. Vt equals c left parenthesis 1 versus 2 slash c2. The term 1 versus 2 slash c2 is none other than the Lorentz factor in its reciprocal form that forms the basis of Einstein's special theory of relativity. Thus we have linked Euler's formula, the most powerful equation in analytic mathematics, with Einsteinian relativity, one of the two jewels of modern science. Yet Euler's formula is also the basis of Fourier wave mathematics, from which is derived both quantum mechanics and holography. Therefore, Euler's formula is none other than the means of unifying quantum mechanics and relativity, which is the object of science's obsessive pursuit of a final theory of everything. Euler's formula is the final equation they are seeking. Euler's formula is the God equation, the answer to everything. Science, if it came to its senses, would understand that it is grounded in analytic mathematics. Euler's formula defines the frequency singularity of mind that gives rise to the spacetime universe of matter. It's all in the math. If you do the math, you get all of the answers to existence. Fourier mathematics is the basis of holography, and the spacetime universe is simply a hologram mathematically contained within the cosmic mind, singularity. The material world exists inside a mind, and is just an elaborate mathematical thought of that mind, a collective thought. Just as an individual mind can create a dream world, the collection of all individual minds can create a world too. The world created by all minds is this world. When an individual goes to sleep, his mind goes to his own private dream world. When an individual wakes up, he returns to the collective world, the collective reality. All individual minds have access to their own private world, and also access to the collective world which they share with every other mind. Sleeping/waking simply involves transitioning between the individual world and the collective world. That's it. There's no mystery. Reality is all about the operations of individuals' minds, in conjunction with the operations of the collection of all individual minds. Fourier mathematics is at the core of all of it. We could not have the world if we did not have Fourier mathematics. The reason the world is as it is because Fourier mathematics is as it is. If Fourier mathematics was some other way, either we wouldn't exist at all, or we would be radically different. Mathematics gives rise to the world. If mathematics were different, the world would be different. Every feature of our world can be traced back to Fourier mathematics, not to God or anything else. In equation 2, if c equals 1, as it does in our Euler unit circle, then equation 3, Vt equals 1 versus 2, so Vt2 plus versus 2 equals 1. The Pythagorean trigonometric identity is a trigonometric identity expressing the Pythagorean theorem in terms of trigonometric functions. The identity is sin2 cedilla plus cos2 cedilla equals 1. If we choose a value of 30 degrees, sin2 cedilla plus cos2 cedilla equals 1 is 0.5 right parenthesis 2 plus 0.866 right parenthesis 2 equals 0.25 plus 0.75 equals 1. As the angle increases to 90 degrees, Vt goes to 1. As the angle decreases to 0, Vt goes to 0. Since Vt is imaginary length equals time, then time stops at 0, while space stops at 90 degrees. A time-like environment is close to 90 degrees. A space-like environment is close to 0 degrees. We are more or less stationary in space. So we are all moving through time. If we were stationary in time, we would be permanently moving through space. We would be in a world made of time objects, imaginary space objects. Isn't it amazing that space-time reality reduces to Pythagorean triangles and trigonometry? Such is the wonder of math. Such is its divine power.